we're going to do is we're going to start off reviewing some of the economic principles that we talked about last week. So, we talked about profit. Profit, of course, is the reason to sell something or offer a service for hire. If you can't make a profit doing something, you won't do something for very long. Your profit, of course, is your incentive. Private property allows profits. If you don't own something, you can't sell it, of course. If you can't sell it, you can't make a profit from it. If you can't make a profit from it, will you put any effort into it? Of course not. Competition makes everything better, and it makes everything better for everyone, as we talked about last week. Prices are set by what people will pay. Things are valued by how much someone will pay for it. We talked about last week the difference between a water and a diamond. Well, it's different if you're in a jewelry store. Well, which one do you value more? If you're having someone propose to you, of course you value the diamond much more. However, if you are found lost in the desert and thirsty, at that moment you're going to value water much more than you do your wedding ring. So things are valued by how much someone will pay for it. And of course prices are set by whatever the market will bear. So just to recap, private property rights allow profits, which is an incentive to take care of stuff and to buy and sell stuff. This is how the free market economy works. This is the invisible hand at work. That is why you laissez-faire. You leave it alone. Let's talk about sound money. No, we're not talking about the sound of money. He's wearing a Pink Floyd t-shirt. That might work if we played a little Pink Floyd money, but it's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about the sound of money. We're talking about sound money, or good money, proper theory of money. So let's talk about the history of money. This is sort of a philosophical history rather than necessarily a chronological history, but essentially back in time you've got a guy with a cow. So he's a dairy farmer, let's just say. And he's got milk, he's got other dairy products, but he wants some new shoes. So what does he do before money? He walks his cow down, or he carries some barrels of milk or whatever it is, some cheese, and he goes to the shoemaker and he says, I need some new shoes. And he said, would you like some milk? And if that shoemaker has all the milk he can handle, I say, I'm sorry, I don't want any milk today. So the dairy farmer has to go maybe to the butcher and say, well, I've got some milk and you've got some meat. Well, I think maybe that shoemaker might want some meat. So if you give me some meat for my milk, well, then I can take that over here, and so on and so forth. And this is obviously a very cumbersome system. So someone says, why don't we have some coins? Why don't we have some precious metal to symbolize what we've got back home, what we've got back at the shop? That way you're not carrying around shoes and buckets of your milk and such things. You're now carrying around coins and precious metals to symbolize what you've got. So we're carrying around coins and we've got precious metals, etc. And someone says, well, this is still pretty cumbersome. Why don't we try some paper? Of course, we all got scared because paper, this is not worth much. Gold, we know this is worth something. Silver and copper, etc., this is worth something. Paper is nothing. So they got scared. I'm not really sure if we should have some paper money, but they said, don't worry, it'll be backed up in gold. So whatever you've got in paper symbolizes what you've got in gold. Okay, let's try it. So paper money is reluctantly substituted for coins, precious metals. Paper money at this point is redeemable in gold, silver, copper, etc. So productivity, as we know, is adding to the economy. Productivity causes wealth. Wealth is symbolized by money. Money called currency, of course. So money is based in productivity. Unsound money. When a country starts printing money without it being backed in gold, it is worth less. Not worthless completely, but worth less than it would be if it were actually still backed in productivity. So it is not based on true wealth. A gold standard is when a country's money is backed by actual gold in the bank or in the reserve. You can go to the bank and you can exchange your paper money for the equivalent in gold. Before the 1930s, America's money was backed in gold. Let's look at some examples of pre-1930s money. There we have a $1,000 bill, and I know it's a little bit small to see, but can anyone see some of the interesting wording on that? Look around, examine it, see what you can see that is interesting.
Says redeem.
Will pay to the bearer on demand $1,000.
That's right. So in the bottom we see here it actually says that they will pay on demand that amount. Now, can anyone see what it says in even smaller print up here?
It says redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank.
Okay. And you see other places on here and it says series of 1928.
Yep.
So this is 20s money here. Let's keep on looking.
Cleveland.
So we've got a 50 here. Notice in those same places it says underneath grant there, it says United States of America will pay to the bearer on demand $50. Of course, again, upper left, redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury or in gold or lawful money at any Federal Reserve Bank. Once again, this is 1928. Let's keep on going. $20 bill. You see once again this is a 28 note. It says again, will pay. Redeemable, same things. Now James is already ahead of me.
Doesn't say it today.
Yep, you're ahead of me. So, once again a $5 bill. Redeemable in gold. Will pay to the bearer of. Now pull out your own dollars if you would please. I'll even do it. James is way ahead of us. That's right, everyone pull out James's dollar. Now please look for some of that same wording. See if you can see that same wording or see what it has substituted instead of.
This note is legal tender.
Huh, isn't that interesting? A little bit less exciting than will pay gold. Now what about under the president there? Does it say anything about will pay to the bearer of?
No, it just says his name.
Just says his name. Instead of saying redeemable in gold on demand at the United States Treasury, it says this note is legal tender. So it's just saying it. It's a declaration. It's saying, trust me. I mean, Washington on the $1 bill might as well just have his eye winking. Just trust me, buddy. It's good. Something very uninspiring has happened to our money, and it happened after 1928. Well, there are really two major events that caused America's money to become unsound in the 1900s. The first one chronologically happened, well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. The second one is we went off the gold standard. April 5th, 1933, FDR, President Roosevelt, forbids the hoarding of gold and requires delivery of gold coins to the federal government. Citizens are no longer allowed to own gold coins, bullion, or certificates. The mint stopped producing gold coins by executive order. That just doesn't get you angry. So this was a federal confiscation. Now, yes, they did pay you, but they set their own prices. But you had to give up your gold. You could not possess it unless it was in the form of decoration or jewelry. You had to give up your gold bars. You had to give up your coins, your bullion.
I wonder how many people really gave it all like that.
That's a good question. But this was a law. Our president did this. Now you say, what kind of president confiscates gold from its citizens? The same kind of president that stays in office 4 terms. And of course, we know that FDR, he broke the tradition set by George Washington to only have 2 terms in office. Well, he took 4 till he died. And after that, Congress said, no more. We're going to set an official term limit. But FDR was the one who broke that precedent. Same kind of guy that's going to take your gold away from you at a set government price. In 1971, President Nixon prohibited redeemability of dollars to gold from international currency. So essentially, before 1971, other countries could still come in and exchange their gold dollars, or their dollars rather, for gold. And Nixon essentially took us off of that standard. So since
Because they were taking off the gold.
Well, right. Well, and so whether or not this was smart in the big picture, they were taking our gold. So essentially, in the 1900s, we went off of the gold standard. That's right. So first you had FDR, and then you had Nixon. Essentially, the world economy for the last 80 or so years has just been sort of in free-floating status. What is the result of these policies? What happens when money isn't based in productivity? Gold, precious metals. There's a little graphic showing what has happened to the worth of our dollar. We can see there in 1900, and it goes down and down and down until about 2000 is when this graphic ends. But essentially, this is the worthiness or the worth of your dollar. Why is it that people will say, I remember when milk was 5 cents a gallon, or I remember when gas was 10 cents a gallon, or something like that? Is it because it's gotten harder to produce milk or gas? No. Over time, we find more efficient ways to do things. Naturally, the price of things goes down. So why now are things all of a sudden more expensive? It's because our dollar has been devalued. So now it takes more to buy what you used to buy with less. When money is not based on real productivity, which is represented by precious metals, the currency is devalued. That kind of money is called fiat money. A fiat is a decree or an order, sort of like what it says on our dollar bills now. Just trust me, it's good. It's like someone just decreeing that our money is worth something. A couple moments ago, I mentioned 2 events that caused America's money to become unsound. The first event that I mentioned was the departure from the gold standard. The second event was the creation of the Federal Reserve, which actually happened first. There she is in all of her unglory, although it's a pretty nice building. 1913 was actually a pretty bad year for America. We had just come out of World War I. We had a large war debt, as we normally do coming out of wars. In addition to the Federal Reserve being created, that was when they decided to take money out of our paychecks. We also got the income tax during 1913. But in 1913, the Federal Reserve is created, which is the mechanism, it's the machine, so to speak, the government uses to print so much fiat currency. Now, they don't actually print a lot of it now, and I'm sure there are, in fact, printing presses running, but now it's more so just digits on a computer. Someone is sitting in front of a computer and says, we're going to create more, types out the amount. This is sort of a fictional account, but they essentially hit enter, and they've pumped more money into the economy. It's complicated, but the Federal Reserve basically just creates money whenever it wants to. Since September of 2012, the Federal Reserve has been printing, so to speak, about $85 billion a month. This has been happening through quantitative easing, buying up government bonds, essentially, and some other things. But they have not set a time when they will stop. $85 billion, so that you can just picture someone there just typing out once a month, okay, it's September 1st, 85, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, okay, that's billion, enter. And it just enters the economy. Now, of course, this is a simplified way of how it would occur, but remember that debt clock? The debt with all the numbers just running and running and running? Well, that's fueled in large part by us simply just printing that money. That's debt. In other words, we're just creating that money. It's not backed by anything. So that debt clock, that's a good reason why it's going up so fast. And, James, does that sort of help answer your question as to why it's been going down? Because number one, it's not attached to actual gold and productivity. And number two, since 1913, they've just been printing it. Now, there's different rates that they've been printing it, but essentially, when you print up $85 billion worth every month, unless we've somehow magically created $85 billion worth of new productivity, well then that's fiat currency. That's just by decree. So that's going to devalue your money. So inflation. There are different kinds of inflation. Price inflation, wage inflation, etc. Right now we're going to discuss monetary inflation. Monetary inflation is the increase of money into the system, into the economy. When you increase money into the system reacts. You can't fool the system. When you pump money into the system, other things increase also. The prices of wages, the prices of goods and services. Right now, people are noticing when they go to the supermarket, the prices of their milk, or their cheese, or their bread is slowly increasing. I bought something today that a couple years ago was $6.50. Now it's up to $7.89. It's the same item, but it's just increasing. So there are different kinds of inflation, but essentially this is fueled by more money being pumped into the economy. who is hurt with this sort of inflation? Well, lots of people, but among other things, people on fixed incomes. I was sharing this last night with someone in last night's class, and she was getting upset. I mean, she really was. She was sort of, because essentially, you remember that graphic with the value going down? Well, if someone promises you a pension, when you retire you'll get X amount of money. If you take this job and you work it for 25 years, if you start in 1990, well, by 2010 they promised you $1,000 a month or whatever it is. Well, $1,000 in 1990 would buy more than it would in 2010. So essentially they stole from you. They took that money from you. Or people on things like Social Security.
Those fiat dollars back then, they were, say, worth $1, are now only 50 cents.
Well, exactly, and they're just worth less and less the more they print. So, for instance, people on Social Security, when they started, working and all that, well, they thought, well, sure, this will get me through retirement, this will get me through those years, but all of a sudden, each one of those dollars is worth less. It can buy less. So it really hurts people on fixed incomes, where essentially, if you put it in the bank, well, if the rate of inflation is 3%, that means essentially it's 3% worth less every year, every quarter, whatever. Well, then that means you've got to be making some sort of return on investment more than 3% just to not have your money decaying in the bank. And so essentially, inflation is the tax that hurts everyone. No one can escape inflation. Also, people who are owed money. If you're owed money, if you say, well, I'll pay this back, and you say, by this year I'm going to start paying it back, and you say, okay, on this date I'll give you your money. Well, if that's a period of 10, 20 years, whatever it is, well, by the time you're getting it back 20 years from that point, well, it's actually worth less. And so you gave the person essentially more money on the front end than they're paying you back on the back end. Let me just say something else. Who benefits from this? Well, the debtors. Those that are owed, well, that owe money, well, they actually get to pay back in cheaper bills, etc. Boom and bust cycles. A bubble, in economic terms, is any industry where people think that they will get rich because the value of that thing will never go down. They buy at one price today, and tomorrow the price is higher. So they can sell tomorrow and make money. They think this will never end. In the 1920s, actually, people thought the stock market would always rise. Your average person, your average housewife, your average just regular Joe would get up in the morning, and all across the nation they would open up the paper, they'd look and check their stocks. Everyone was invested. Because at that time, stocks would always rise. You would put in a little bit of money today, the next day it'd be worth more. You'd put in a little bit today, a week, it might have doubled or tripled. So what are people doing? They're throwing it all in there. If you think it'll never go down, you're going to over leverage yourself. You're going to put in twice than you actually have, or 3 times, etc. And for a while this was working. People were getting rich. Everyone was getting involved. In the late 2000s, people thought the price of a home would always rise. We remember this recently as the housing bubble. And you remember all those television shows which are still on today, Flip That House, and all these television shows where someone would buy something one day, you could turn around the next day and sell it and make $1,000. Sell it in a month, you've made $10,000. You improve it a little bit, sell it 3 months from now, you've made $40,000, $50,000. People thought this would never end. They're building these large projects. Little McMansions, so to speak, are just popping up all over the place. People thought you can't go wrong in housing. They said price of a home will never go down. In the 1600s, actually, people thought the price of a tulip, yes, a tulip, a flower, would always rise. In fact, there was a tulip bubble in the 1600s. But of course, pop. The bubble bursts. People realize that thing will not always increase in price. They've over-leveraged themselves. They've gotten themselves in trouble. In the 20s, bubble burst, and they said, okay, pay me the money you owe. And you said, well, wait a minute, I thought it was always going to go up. People went bankrupt. They lost their shirt, lost their homes. They were out of work. They were bankrupt because they thought I could put in twice than what I owe right now, and it's okay because tomorrow I'll make all my money back. And all of a sudden, their margins were called. They didn't have it. Same thing with the housing situation. People got in over their heads. How many of us have driven by a large, beautiful house that no one's living in and it's still got the construction sign in front? Because someone got into it, thought it was just going to keep on going, and all of a sudden, they ran out of money. That home's just sitting there. Once again, same thing happened with tulips in the 1600s. You can look that one up on your own. The process of this bubble growing, and then bursting is called a boom and bust cycle. These bubbles are fed by the money being pumped into the system by the Federal Reserve. Money is easier to get when the Fed is just creating it out of thin air. This causes people to make bad decisions with it. It's more complicated than this, but this is the summary. Let's talk about banking. Now, we're all mature individuals here, so we understand this, but let's just go over it because it matters in a moment. Banking. People give their money to banks. Banks lend that money to other people so they can use it. The banks charge a fee to borrow that money. That fee is called an interest rate. Of course, we know this. That's right. So that the interest rate is the bank's incentive to lend it. Absolutely. The interest rate is the cost of borrowing money. In a typical savings account, the bank will pay you a certain amount to keep your money in the bank because they are lending it out to other people. It's okay. So they're going to pay you a certain amount to keep your money in a savings account because they're going to lend it out to other people. When interest rates are high, the bank pays you more in your savings account. When interest rates are low, they pay you less in your savings account. So when the bank lends it out to other individuals, it's an interest rate. When the Federal Reserve lends that money out to banks, they do it at a discount rate. The discount rate is like the interest rate for banks to borrow the money. The discount rate is the cost of borrowing money from the Federal Reserve. If the banks receive the money at a low discount rate, it'll charge a low interest rate to people who borrow it. The banks will charge a higher interest rate if they received it at a higher discount rate from the Federal Reserve. So if a bank gets money at 2% discount rate, they might lend it to you and me and to businesses at a 4% interest rate. Of course, they make a 2% profit from lending that money to you. Now, when the Federal Reserve lends money at low discount rates, that means money is cheap. The bank doesn't need your money to lend out as much. In that case, the money it pays you in your savings account is less. Now, how many of us look at our savings accounts now and realize we're not getting much for keeping it there? Does anyone know what some interest rates are that the bank's paying us in savings accounts? Is it even 1%?
It's been so long, it's not even, I haven't even that it's worth looking at.
It's not even worth to open up the piece of paper.
A tenth or 2%.
Yeah, it's very, very low. Very low. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because the Federal Reserve, for a number of years now, has been creating this money, $85 billion a month, and lending it out at almost a 0% discount rate to banks. So a bank can get it at almost zero, charge a low interest rate to us. That means they don't need your money. The bank does not need your money in the savings account because it's getting it for almost nothing from the Federal Reserve. So why would it pay you more to keep it in the bank when it can get it for almost nothing from the Fed? So people in this case are rewarded less for saving their money. When the Federal Reserve prints lots of money, it hurts people saving their money. Saving versus spending. Some people say the economy gets better when people spend. If you'll watch the financial news, they'll talk about consumer spending rose this month, or consumer spending is down. They'll get upset. So even the smart ones, they still measure things in amount of spending. How much people spend at the malls. They talk about the economy is going to get better during Christmas because everyone's out spending. Other people say the economy gets better when people save money. Really, both are true, but one is more true than the other. There was this guy named John Maynard Keynes. His last name looks like Keynes, but it's Keynes. He was a British economist and lived from 1883 to 1946. He said that governments could spend their way into prosperity. He thought government debt was a great idea. He wanted people to just spend and spend, and he thought this would produce a great economy. Sound familiar? There he is with his book, and this is just a whole lot of nonsense is what it is, but he wrote The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. Now, of course, this sounds great to the politician who wants to buy their votes, who just wants to spend a whole lot of money, create a whole bunch of programs. Well, this guy gave all these politicians an intellectual excuse to do this. So most of what you see in governments these days are based on Keynesian economics. There's this other guy named Frederick Hayek. He was an Austrian economist who lived from 1889 to 1992. He said that government should be limited and not go into debt. He thought that people should save and invest their money wisely. He was a part of the Austrian School of Economics. These philosophies, the philosophies of Keynes and Hayek, are still at war today. There's his one of his most popular books, The Road to Serfdom. A country's economy grows when people are productive. Of course, we know this. When people are productive, they make money. When they make money, they spend some and they can save some. When people save money, they can put it in the bank and make money off that savings account. In a sound money economy, we save our money, we put it in the bank, and a business comes and borrows it from the bank at an interest rate. But that case is based on actual productivity. This is not fiat money just being pumped out there by the Federal Reserve. This is a sound economy based on actual productivity. The spending way of building an economy is when the Federal Reserve prints lots of fiat currency. They lend it out at cheap rates, businesses borrow it for cheap rates, people don't make money in their bank accounts, and lots of businesses are created, lots of things are bought. But is there a problem? What is it? Sustainability. Because where was the productivity that caused all this money to be created? If this is fiat or fake money because it isn't based in real productivity, then are these real businesses? Yeah, they're real businesses, but they are often bad businesses. The money was cheap to borrow, so someone didn't care too much if the business idea was good or not. Once again, during the housing bubble, people would just embark upon these grand projects, especially out in Las Vegas. We heard about these grand building projects. And of course, people got in real deep, spent lots of money, and went bankrupt. The money was cheap. You didn't really have to think about it too much. You thought you could make it back really easily. At some point, these businesses go bankrupt. They go out of business. They lose all their money. They can't pay back their loans. People lose their jobs and their homes. People are really hurt. The economy didn't grow. Nothing was added to the economy. The economy lost. The bubble burst. So which way seems better, the saving or the spending way of growing an economy? Think about your own life. Should you save money and spend wisely, or should you spend all your money and go into debt to meet your goals? I bet you Dave Ramsey has an opinion. Borrowing money isn't always bad, but it's very dangerous. Both people and countries should be productive and save money to be prosperous. Another example I'd like to give recently is student loans. Who's heard about the idea the government has to pay back or just forgive an individual's student loans after going to college? Well, almost everywhere in life you can look, and if something is messed up, oftentimes the government did it. And oftentimes it's because of the Federal Reserve pumping this money in there. Who knows of a college student with a college degree that is either living at home or is living at home and just working at the burger joint again, or is a barista at Starbucks, or is waiting tables? Well, why is this? Well, just like the housing bubble where they said everyone should own a home, they've also been saying everyone should go to college. But that's not necessarily true. When interest rates are low, when money is cheap, people make bad decisions. And so everyone thinks, well, my kid's got to go off to college, and we'll take out a huge loan to do it. So they go off to college, they get their degree, they learn maybe nothing, and they get out and they've got $80,000 worth in debt. So what are they doing? They're moving back in with their parents, who love them and of course will let them, and now they're just getting any job to start paying back those debts. And guess what else happens? That degree is worth less. Just like you have monetary inflation, you have, I call it the inflation of education. If you say everyone goes to college, everyone gets a college degree, well then that piece of paper is worth less, just like the dollar is. So now someone's got to have more credentials than just that piece of paper. But now they've got the debt. And the government has encouraged this by encouraging everyone to go to college. We'll give you low interest rates. And now, on top of it, they say we're just going to forgive it. Go work for a nonprofit or something like this, and after a certain number of years, we'll just forgive it. We'll let the taxpayers absorb it. You know, Ronald Reagan, after the Carter years, when we had high inflation, well, he actually went in there and he said, well, you know, your Federal Reserve, it's sort of like a pump that you use to inflate your air mattress. You know, you turn it on and it blows all the air in there and it inflates the thing. But you can also turn the pump around, hit the reverse button, and it'll suck it out. Well, you can do that with the Federal Reserve. And so essentially he got in there and said, well, we're facing inflation, high inflation. Let's put the thing in reverse. So actually the first couple years of his presidency were rough because he was actually hitting reverse on the blower. And he was sucking it all back into the Federal Reserve. And so of course we had very high interest rates in the early 80s because he was essentially making money cost more to suck it back in. And then after that period, we had the prosperity of the 80s. And so essentially there can be people who understand these things and who do the right thing. It's hard for a time, but afterwards you can once again have prosperity with good policies. So this is not a done deal. This isn't gravity that you can't avoid. This is a thing controlled by humans. In other words, there are people, with their fingers typing the numbers and sort of with their foot on the accelerator, get different people in there, you can go in the other direction.